After 5 hard years, I, Darra Mitchell, 29, am finally going to see my estranged family. They're celebrating my sister Heather's engagement tonight at Maison, one of the city's most upscale dining establishments. They have consistently criticized my professional choices and written off my aspirations to become a chef as being beneath our family name. They have no idea how much has changed since I left. As I adjust my basic black dress, my stomach twists. Making reservations about your own past can occasionally be the most difficult. Please share your viewing location in the comments section below before I begin my narrative. If you've ever had to prove yourself to someone who ought to have trusted in you right away, don't forget to like and subscribe. For my family, growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, meant something quite particular. The Mitchells had more than just money. We left a legacy, the appropriate address, the right schools, the right occupations, and status symbols were the foundations of my parents' identity, Margaret and Richard Mitchell. During fundraisers held in our expansive colonial home, my mother would parade us kids around like accessories. Her level of pride is closely correlated with how well we meet her definition of success. At garden parties, Mother would tell her friends that the Mitchell children were bound for greatness, and my father would nod in agreement behind his whiskey tumbler. Ethan has great promise in mathematics, and Heather is already committed to Yale Law. He will be a great investment banker. My mother's smile would almost imperceptibly stiffen when guests would unavoidably turn to me, the middle kid. Draw is inclined towards creativity. She'll figure it out. She was saying that I was the disappointment to the family. I spent a lot of time in the kitchen, which is our maid Elena's domain, while Heather did exceptionally well in debate club and Ethan won maths contests. A kind-hearted Greek woman named Elena saw something in me that my parents were unable to. Sincere enthusiasm. As I assisted her in neatly chopping vegetables or kneading bread dough, she would remark, "You have the hands for this work. You understand food in your soul by the way it tastes and smells." I started making my own recipes when I was 13. By the age of 16, I was entertaining my pals with covert dinner parties while my parents were away. My haven and the area where I felt most like myself was the kitchen. When I considered going to culinary school in my junior year of high school, my father said that cooking was a servant's job. Chefs are hired by Mitchells. They do not become them. I applied to business schools in an effort to please them, and I eventually enrolled at Dartmouth, where my father and grandfather had gone. Even so, I was able to pursue my genuine love by enrolling in nutrition and food science electives that I could defend as being related to business administration. In order to finance my covert weekend courses with local cooks, I established an underground supper club in my flat, where I charged students for creative 5-course dinners. Up until graduate school, I kept up my double life. I was 6 months into an MBA program that left me feeling incredibly dissatisfied when 3-star French chef Laurent Bisset came to speak on campus. He called me aside after eating the cuisine I had prepared for a campus event. His accent was thick, but his eyes were serious as he said, "Who taught you to make a reduction like this?" I acknowledged that I had taught myself through books, films, and experiments. He gave his card to me. "Your ability is being wasted here. Visit my New York kitchen. I'll elevate you to greatness." Everything changed that night. After 2 weeks, I stood in my parents' spotless living room and gave them the rundown on why I was leaving my MBA program to go to culinary school. After I made my declaration, there was an unbearable quiet. When my father finally responded, "This is absolutely unacceptable," his voice was dangerously quiet. "We have made every possible investment in your education." I retorted, "Everything. Except respect for what I truly want." My mom's expression darkened. "You do this pastime on your own initiative, without our financial or other assistance." After returning home from her first year of law school, Heather chuckled icily. "Always the outlaw. See how long you can continue to cook at minimum wage." Ethan, who already works for a prominent financial company, just gave me a humiliated look. That evening, I departed with just a modest suitcase and my personal savings. The following 5 years were more difficult than I had ever experienced. Taking out loans for culinary school, living in a small flat with 3 roommates, and working 18-hour days. However, I flourished under Chef Lawrence's guidance. Something in me was nourished by the kitchen's intensity, discipline, and inventiveness that business school could never provide. Then the chance that would make all the difference arrived. I was approached about a business concept by an investor who had sampled my food at one of Lawrence's events. I served as the executive chef and a co-owner of Maison when it first debuted years ago. I bought out my partners to become a lone proprietor 6 months later. I was aware of the irony that, albeit not in the manner my parents had planned, I had ultimately used my business degree. Maison swiftly rose to the top of the city's reservation difficulty list. We were highlighted in the Future of American Cuisine issue of Food and Wine magazine last month. I stayed away from my family during this entire ordeal. Holiday cards and sporadic, uncomfortable phone conversations with my mother, but nothing significant. They were aware that I was making progress with eating, but they were unaware of my real achievements. I purposely kept it that way. I wanted to be acknowledged for my successes on my own terms, not to win their acceptance at last. I was therefore taken aback when the stamped invitation to Heather's engagement banquet showed up at my flat. The location, my own restaurant, was even more startling. They couldn't tell it was mine, of course. They most likely selected it since it was remarkable and distinctive, ideal for displaying their position. I debated for days before deciding to accept. Maybe to finally conclude a chapter, but not to look for approval. I had gained perspective after 5 years of separation. Now that I was confident in my accomplishments, I could confront them without faltering under their criticism. How it would feel to watch people eat at my restaurant and critique the very food I had put so much effort into making was something I hadn't thought about. But when I pulled open the huge glass doors of Maison that evening, prepared to play the role of the struggling black sheep one last time, that's exactly what was waiting for me. I entered Maison and was immediately surrounded by its familiar aroma. I insisted on having saffron, reduced wine, and the delicate scent of fresh herbs sent twice a day. Usually, this scent helped me stay grounded and reminded me of all I had created. It only made me more anxious tonight. I had taken great care in selecting my ensemble, which consisted of a basic black dress designed by Diane von Fenberg and adorned with a single pearl strand that had once belonged to my grandmother. My status-conscious relatives would probably see my understated elegance as an attempt to do too much with too little. They would likely assume that I couldn't afford a decent style because my hair was pulled back into a crisp chignon. My senior server, Marcus, noticed me right away. His questioning eyes widened a little. I hardly ever entered as a visitor through the front door. I gave him a small head shake and muttered, "Not yet." He gave a covert nod and went about his work. They were immediately visible to me from the entrance. The center table was what they had asked for. They had, of course, and were set out in an opulent tableau. My father was looking at the wine list with a heightened level of focus while my mother was in Chanel. Heather was dressed in what appeared to be Gucci's latest season. Bradley, a man I didn't recognize, sat next to her. He probably had his hair slicked back and a watch that caught the light whenever he moved his wrist. Ethan and his spouse, Allison, finished the photo wearing business attire as if they had just left a crucial meeting. My hostess, Celeste, came over, grinning broadly. She managed to catch herself saying, "Good evening, Ms., just in time. Your group is seated already. Could I show you where their table is?" I whispered, "Thank you, Celeste," acknowledging her discretion. My mother was the first to see me as we got closer. Her eyes made the fast evaluation I recalled from my early years. My appearance was deemed inadequate by a head-to-toe scan that estimated its value. "Dar," she replied, getting up to give me a cheek kiss. "You've come at last." We were starting to ponder. I checked my watch and said, "Mother, I'm exactly on time, 7:30 precisely." My dad got up and gave me a firm embrace before giving me a clumsy pat on the back. He said, "You look healthy," which, in Mitchellese, meant that I hadn't kept up the somewhat unhealthy thinness that was valued in our social group. Heather offered me a cheek kiss, barely bothering to stand. She said, "This is Bradley," as her fiancé stood up and held out his hand. He held onto tightly. I was familiar with this power move from many business meetings. Wharton MBA, Princeton, undergraduate. He gave his introduction. "Just promoted to junior partner at Goldman. Well, it's good to meet you. Or I've been told about you. Only status and qualifications." Language is cherished by the Mitchell family. Even though his wife Allison's grin appeared strained, Ethan gave me a more sincere hello. She had been assigned with locating this remarkably exclusive restaurant for tonight's supper, and I subsequently found out that she was concerned about whether it would live up to everyone's expectations. My mother remarked, Well, as I sat down in the final available seat, we've placed our champagne order already. I'm hoping that's okay. They had selected the second most costly choice on our list, I observed. Ostentatious but not careless, typical in our surroundings. The spirit I had worked so hard to create filled the eatery. The illumination was just right, dark enough for intimacy, yet bright enough to highlight each dish's exquisite plating. The sound level was ideal for both seclusion and conversation. The tables were placed far enough apart to allow for discretion, yet close enough to generate energy. I had chosen every element, including the weight of the linen and the specially made seats that urged guests to stay without getting uncomfortable. I saw the staff's nuanced responses when they became aware that I was seated with visitors. I noticed Jose, our sommelier, coming over with the champagne. He asked whether I wanted him to acknowledge me with the smallest lift of his eyebrow. I made an indiscernible headshake. Instead, he presented the bottle to my father with studied elegance and said, "Excellent choice," before starting to pour. My father unnecessarily declared, "We're celebrating an engagement, obviously looking for preferential treatment. Congratulations," Jose said with ease. It is a privilege for Maison to host this important event. I'm shocked that you were able to reserve, I uttered naively. I've heard it's really challenging. Bradley leaned in front of him. He winked so smugly that I had to hold back an eye roll as he said, "I know people," requested a favor from a customer who gets along well with management. I refrained from speaking. Craig Winters, one of our frequent investors who occasionally asked for tables for business associates, was probably the client. I reminded myself to talk to him about Bradley. Aren't you resourceful then? I lifted my champagne flute and whispered. My father said, to Heather and Bradley, a wonderful future and the ideal pairing. I noted that the champagne was supplied at the exact temperature I had instructed my employees to maintain as we clinked glasses, and I took a tiny sip. My mother then started to put down her glass and focus on me. Tell us about your activities during the last few years. You've been really enigmatic. The attention of the table turned to me. 5 sets of eyes are assessing and prepared to make a decision. I've been working in the food industry, I said plainly, growing and learning. Heather sighed. Like if I had confessed to a terrible addiction, still in that cooking phase. I assumed you would have progressed to something more significant by now, Ethan went on to say. Not everyone can handle the corporate path effectively, turning his defense into criticism. Bradley appeared perplexed. What do you do specifically? I gave a hazy response. Line cook, catering, various roles. I've worn many hats, my mother added. Well, we're just glad you're managing to support yourself, with a phony politeness that I was all too familiar with. Though we've always said our door is open if things get too challenging, one of our most seasoned servers, Jessica, was carrying the amuse-bouche, which is a tiny ball of compressed watermelon with fermented black garlic and a microgreen that I had purchased from a specialty urban farm. She placed one before each diner with care and proclaimed, "Congratulations of the kitchen." She gave me a fleeting look of allegiance before returning to her businesslike demeanor. Is this all? With a disappointed look at the lone bite, Heather inquired. I'm hungry. I clarified that it's an amuse-bouche, a palate opener. Actually, the supper hasn't begun yet. Duh. I am aware of what an amusing bush is. She lost her temper. Just because I decided to study law rather than play with cuisine doesn't mean that I lack cultural literacy, I observed as each of them sampled my handiwork. Ever mindful of the calories, my mother took the smallest bite. With hardly any time to taste it, my father shoved the entire thing into his lips. Bradley pretended to be a wine expert, describing the flavors in ways that had no culinary meaning, while Ethan and Allison at least seemed to enjoy it. Heather was the only one who didn't touch hers. She said, I don't do raw garlic. The black garlic was far from raw, but it had undergone a 60-day fermentation process in a temperature-controlled setting, a method I had mastered after 3 years of trial and error. I noticed the look of dismay on our server's eyes as she cleared the plates, pointing to Heather's unfinished dish. I was protective of my employees at the time, not of myself, because they were so proud of the work we did. In addition to being a restaurant, I had created M-Zone into a kind of family, united not by blood but by a common enthusiasm. Even though the evening had only just begun, I could already see the old dynamic taking hold. My decisions needed to be justified since I was the outsider, the one who had made the incorrect decision. However, I now sat at this table with a secret strength that would quickly flip this whole dynamic around, unlike the Darra 5 years earlier. As our first course arrived, I purposefully turned back to Heather and said, "Tell us about the wedding plans." It took me months to master this delicate combination of house-made ricotta, basil oil, and heirloom tomatoes. Heather instantly became happier. "Naturally, we have a reservation at St. Thomas Church. Mother believes we should reduce the number of visitors to 350, but the reception at the square is for 100. The guest list is becoming a mess," my mother said. "We can't put the Bennett and the Astor Williams in the same section because they haven't spoken since that terrible yacht disaster." I forced myself not to smile. I was always in awe of the seriousness with which they address these societal considerations. For hundreds seems like too much. I leaned forward and took a bite out of the tomato dish. "It's more than simply a celebration, it's networking. Relationship investments make up half of those invitations." "Exactly," my dad concurred. "Bradley is aware of the concept of social capital. This kind of wedding opens doors." "You Dar. How about you?" Heather's tone became abruptly sharp as she asked, "Do you have any prospects in the works? Or do you still spend too much time cooking?" She was shoving the heirloom tomatoes around her plate with apparent indifference, and I could see that she had hardly tasted her lunch. I replied simply, "I'm focused on my career right now." "Career," Ethan said again, chuckling a little. "Is that the name we're using?" My mum got right in. "Darra, my love, you must be considering getting married by the age of 29. Margaret Whitley's handsome son is there. I think he works in hospital management. Incredibly steady." "Mother, I don't want to be set up," she insisted that, given your circumstances, your alternatives would become increasingly constrained as the years went by. Our server seemed to finish the first course before I could reply. I was too stressed to fully appreciate my own work, so I had hardly noticed its flavor. "Does the dish have a problem?" Observing that her dish was almost full, Jessica queried. "Heather, too sour," Heather shot out dismissively. "Additionally, the tomatoes might have been more ripe." I refrained from speaking. Those tomatoes were picked from an upstate farm that grew them especially for us that exact morning, when they were at their best. With well-honed tact, Jessica remarked, "I'm so sorry to hear that. I'll be sure to inform the kitchen." The second dish showed up. My favorite springtime dish was pickled ramps and seared scallops with a brown butter emulsion. I saw my family's emotions as the dishes were placed down. My father sliced into his scallop with his fork and said, "Now this looks promising." Badly swirled his sincere wine, which I had specially chosen to go with this dish. "This has a good wine list. Not outstanding, but adequate." Our transaction Jose glanced at me after hearing this as he went by. I smiled subtly at him. Jose had declined invitations to work with me from establishments all around the world after being snatched from a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris. Darra Allison then made a conscious effort to involve me. "Ethan said you work in the food industry, but you didn't fully explain what you do." Heather interrupted me before I could respond. She's most likely hosting somewhere, seating customers and distributing menus while utilizing that business degree. I did start, in fact. My father interrupted. "There's no shame in that. However, everyone must begin somewhere." I would have anticipated some progress after 5 years. "I've made progress," I muttered. "Into what?" "Applebee's assistant manager?" Heather's own joke made her chuckle. With a rare moment of defense, Heather Ethan issued a warning. "What?" "I'm simply being practical." She decided to forgo her studies in favor of this side project. "There are repercussions for actions." I sipped the wine, letting the well-known flavors ground me. "Heather, how is the law treating you?" Henderson and Block is still there, her face tensed. "I'm currently in between jobs. In fact, spending time organizing the wedding." Bradley said, "She was working too many hours. My wife doesn't need to kill herself at some firm." I told her, "She can do out charitable work like my mother once we are married." I saw a spark of resentment or something. Heather's eyes were filled with frustration before she composed herself and returned to her calm agreement. The third course showed up, a pasta dish that combines pancetta, mint, and spring peas with hand-rolled tagliatelle, one of our specialties that was highlighted in Wine and Food.as. She observed the beautifully presented spaghetti. My mother remarked, "The portion size here is ridiculous. All of this for just 3 bites." I answered, "Mother, it's about quality over quantity." The purpose of the tasting menu is to introduce you to a variety of flavors and sensations. My father complained that restaurants in my day provided a decent dinner for the money. It's just a ploy to charge more for less food with this new cuisine crap. I saw Bradley tear the delicate pasta strands I had manually rolled that morning when he cut into it instead of spinning it. So, how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food service salary? Heather inquired directly. I felt like everyone was staring at me when I said, "This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I take good care of my money," I answered. "Oh please," sneered Heather. "Eating dinner here is more expensive than you most likely earn in a day. Who are you seeing? Does he have to pay for this?" "I'm not in a relationship," I stated calmly. "So how are you able to pay for this place?" She pushed. "Do you owe money? Using all of your credit cards to maintain appearances?" Heather. Ethan seemed uneasy as he issued another warning. She insisted. "No, I want to know." She recommended a meal at one of the city's most upscale restaurants, so we all changed our schedules for it. She is either not being truthful about her circumstances or she is acting irresponsibly with her money. The fourth dish showed up. A wonderfully cooked duck breast served with farro and cherry gastry. It had been done flawlessly by Chef Miranda, who oversaw the kitchen when I wasn't on the queue. After just one taste, Bradley declared, "This duck is undercooked." I examined his plate. The duck was precisely as it should have been, perfectly medium rare. I clarified that was how it was intended to be delivered. The ideal temperature for duck breast is medium rare. He motioned for a waiter and remarked, "I like my meat well done." He spoke without glancing at Jessica as she got closer. "This is unadulterated. Return it and cook it correctly." I noticed a brief moment of displeasure in Jessica's eyes, which was swiftly covered up by politeness. "Naturally, sir. I'm sorry." I glanced at her as she picked up his dish and nodded slightly. Instead of damaging the current breast by overcooking it, she would know to have a fresh one prepared by the kitchen. "Darra, really?" After Jessica left, my mother remarked, "You still haven't responded to Heather's query. How are you going to pay for this dinner?" Around this point, the tension around the table was evident. My chest was conspicuously constricted. It was the same emotion I had experienced at innumerable family gatherings as a child. The feeling that before I had a chance to speak, I had been cornered, scrutinized, and found wanting. However, I had changed from that insecure young lady. I had created something wholly original and of which I was proud. I briefly thought of telling them everything at once, observing how their faces changed when they recognized the restaurant they were in and the food they had been sloppily criticizing. Bradley's overdone duck reappeared before I could make up my mind, but it had lost all of its initial complexity and softness. After just one mouthful, he said, "Much better," but I could see that it was now rough and dry from across the table. Once more, my father motioned for the wine list. This time, we should order a more stunning bottle. Jose brought the leather-bound list over, and my father pretended to look it over before pointing to one of our priciest choices, a Bordeaux that costs more than $800. He said that this one ought to be sufficient. I was very familiar with that bottle. I had chosen it when traveling to France last year, having a face-to-face meeting with the vintner. Although it was amazing, it was entirely inappropriate for the current and future courses. Could I make a suggestion that would go better with the other dishes? I took a chance. My dad waved me away. "Dar, I believe I know my wines." Jose softly asked for directions as he drew my attention. I nodded slightly at him. "Give my dad what he wants. The hill to die on wasn't this one." The work went on as the evening went on, including the last savory course and dessert, which was a deconstructed lemon tart that was one of my personal favorites. Every dish was criticized in some way. Every effort I made to add something to the discussion inadvertently turned into proof of my failure. I was emotionally spent by the time coffee was brought. I could no longer endure the combined weight of my family's disdain and their careless criticism of my life's effort. Then came the day I had been looking forward to and dreaded, the bill. Marcus came over and placed the bill in the middle of the table, hidden in the black leather folder. In a patriarchal reaction, my father reached for it right away, but Bradley stopped him. "Please, Richard, let me," he urged, with the polished elegance of someone who has used even kindness as a tool of manipulation. "Think of it as my gift to commemorate the event." After making the customary token objection, my father gave up. Bradley's face changed from a confident smile to barely disguised horror as he registered the sum as I watched him open the folder. My father noticed the shift and inquired, "Is there a problem?" No. No, Bradley's speedy recovery only confirmed the calculation. I was fully aware of what he was observing. With fine wine pairings, special off-men orders, and $800 Bordeaux, a 7-person meal would cost well over $300. It's a statement, but not out of the ordinary for a restaurant of Maison's calibre. With careful slowness, he went for his wallet and took out a black credit card, making sure that everyone could see the unique tear. Perhaps sensing his uneasiness, Heather decided to bring up her previous inquiry at that precise moment. She said, "So, Dra, in a falsely charming voice, you never did explain how you're managing to contribute to this extravagant dinner. We don't want you to use our account to overextend yourself." Everyone looked back at me. I sensed the old dynamic making an appearance. Heather was the one who succeeded. I am the struggling letdown. I just said, "I can cover my share, but can you?" She leaned forward and pressed. "As everyone knows how much food service costs, is this place even within your means?" There was silence at the table. Even my parents appeared uneasy because the question was so purposefully offensive. My mother whispered, "Heather, maybe it isn't." With her eyes fixed on mine, Heather emphasized, "No, I want to know. We've pretended all evening that everything is good and that Darra isn't having any difficulties as a result of her decision to discard her schooling. We ought to be honest, in my opinion." My cheeks started to flush hotter than my chest. I had been away from creating my own life and success for 5 years, and nothing had changed. I continued to be the family's disappointment and was constantly questioned about why I was here. Bradley jumped in, possibly seeing a chance to regain control following the check shock. "Say so if you need assistance with your piece. There's no shame in that." With a tense voice, I declared, "I don't need help." "Then, how precisely are you covering this cost?" "A meal here costs more than you probably make in a week," Heather insisted. Bradley scowled at the bill. As I was about to reply and finally divulge everything, he declared, "Wait, there's a mistake here. They've only charged us for the wines, not the food." He gave Marcus a sharp signal. "Excuse me, there's an error. On our check." Marcus came to our table at the ideal time, as if he had been anticipating this. In actuality, he most likely had been. "My staff knew me well enough to be watching this drama unfold," he said. "Is there a problem, sir?" Bradley pointed to the bill and remarked, "Yes, you have only charged us for the beverages, not the meal." Marcus gave the bill a quick glance before turning to face me with a curious expression. I made my choice at that very moment. The act had lasted long enough. Marcus received a small nod from me. "There's no mistake, sir," Marcus stated calmly. "The meal component has been handled." "Who did it?" My dad scowled as he asked. Marcus turned to face me, a friendly smile replacing his businesslike manner. "Well, Miss Darra, welcome back. The table you usually use for meetings with investors is set up. Do you want me to take care of things first?" There was complete stillness across the table. 6 sets of eyes looked at me in varying degrees of bewilderment and incredulity. I said, "Thank you, Marcus," in a firm voice despite the rush of excitement. "Yes, kindly end the beverage tab for Mr. Harrington. As always, the rest is on the house," he said. "Very good, Miss Darra," and removed the folder from Bradley's now loose grasp. "Chef Miranda said she wanted to know what you thought of the new spring menu items when you get a chance." I promised him that I would visit the kitchen before to my meeting. I eventually turned to face my family as Marcus left. Their reactions varied from bewilderment to astonishment to the initial realization. What's going on?" At last, my mum was able to. I inhaled deeply. This was the moment I had secretly been looking forward to and dreading for the past 5 years. I said, "Welcome to Maison, my eatery." For what seemed like forever, there was stillness. The first person to recover was my father, whose face changed from one of bewilderment to one of calculating. Carefully, he repeated, "Your restaurant. This is where you work." I explained, "No, father," as an odd serenity descended upon me. "Maison is mine. I am the single proprietor and executive chef." "That isn't feasible," Heather blurted. "Among the most upscale eateries in the city is this one. It has appeared in prominent magazines." I did agree. Wine with food. Bon appetit. Prior to that last month, in their assessment from the previous year, the New York Times gave us 4 stars. Bradley was looking at me as if I had just started talking incoherently. "However, you claim to have a job in food. I mentioned that you were evasive about everything because I wanted to test how you would react if you believed I was having difficulties. And tonight you have all made that very evident. When my mother was socially unstable, her hand fluttered. To her pearls, a goaded gesture. Why wouldn't you share this accomplishment with us, darling? Her emphasis on achievement was quite clear. In a manner that emotion alone could not, success rendered my decisions retroactively palatable. Would you like the full story? Glancing around the table, I inquired. I went on without waiting for a response. I relocated to the city with what little money I had left over 5 years ago. Along with 3 other people, I rented a small room in a Queens flat. I worked 3 jobs during my first year: weekend shifts at a bakery, line cooking at a midtown restaurant from 1 o'clock p.m. to 10 o'clock p.m., and prep cooking at a bakery from 5 o'clock am to noon. I saw their uneasy looks when I took a sip of water. Every night, I slept for 4 hours. My arms were burned and blistered all over. In my little free time, I constantly studied technique. Chef Lauren took me under his wing after first encouraging me to pursue a career in culinary arts. In just 18 months, I was his sous chef. Ethan was observing me with what seemed to be sincere curiosity. Allison appeared impressed. My parents appeared to be in a constant state of self-reflection. I worked at Lawrence Restaurant for a private function 2.5 years ago. James Warren, a visitor from Warren Capital, sampled my specialty dish and requested to speak with the chef. He was shocked to learn that someone so young had produced what he described as the most inventive meal he had tried in a long time. I pointed around us. My first investor was James. We discovered this area, which at the time was a nightclub that had failed. I created the idea, created the menu, employed the personnel, and managed every aspect, including the unique plateware and lighting fixtures. But the price, my father continued, his thoughts apparently still focused on the money. It must have cost millions to open a restaurant of this caliber in this area. I affirmed that the initial investment was $3.4 million. 2 other investors were brought in by James. We received instant praise when we opened, in part because of Lawrence's industry contacts and endorsement. After 6 months, we turned a profit. 3 months later, I obtained a loan and paid off my investors thanks to the restaurant's success. I've owned my soul for more than a year. That's why you suggested that we meet here, Heather said in a low voice. You were aware the entire time. Well, no, I corrected her. This eatery was Allison's choice. Allison, isn't that correct? Everyone looked at Ethan's wife, who flushed profusely. Dar, I had no idea. It was suggested as the city's most spectacular new restaurant by the concierge at Ethan's company. I swear I had no idea it belonged to you. I told her that you didn't, of course. Nobody in the family was aware. That was something I did on purpose. However, why keep it a secret? Mom put pressure on me. Your family is us. We'd have been pleased. I couldn't control my sardonic laughter. Would you? The family that hired the culinary staff is still there. When I decided to go to culinary school, who cut me off entirely? Who? They were making disparaging remarks about my life decisions only a few minutes ago. My father's throat was cleaned. Now that's unfair. We were worried about your future and stability. We would have known you had this level of business sense. That's precisely what I'm saying. I cut you off. By itself, you couldn't respect my desire. Now, since it is associated with achievement and prestige, it only holds significance for you. Chef Miranda came up to our table at that same moment. Chef de cuisine inscribed on the breast while wearing her pristine whites with Miranda Torres. Her figure was stunning. She apologized for interrupting, but SA wanted to confirm your interview for next week's article because the Matsuhisa party had arrived for their tasting. In addition, your publisher contacted you regarding the design of the cookbook cover. I gave a nod. I'm grateful, Miranda. Tell them I'll be there quickly, please. I noticed the increasing awe on my family's expressions as Miranda left. Cookbook, said Heather. Coming out with Cop this autumn. I used anecdotes to verify 120 recipes. My mother, started speaking in the enticing tone she employed when attempting to control a social circumstance. All of this is really amazing. Why did you not inform us sooner? We could have provided you with the same assistance and support that you gave me when I most needed it. I interrupted myself entirely to ask in a modest manner. My father objected, saying we believed it was a phase. How did we know you were this entrepreneurially inclined? It's obvious that you have my business acumen. When he tried to take credit for my accomplishment, I became enraged. I confidently stated, I built this myself, without your support, your money, or your connections. Bradley, who had been unusually silent, suddenly became animated. A cookbook contract that requires a significant down payment. And he made grateful gestures around this location, forgetting his previous criticisms. It must bring in a substantial amount of money. Do you have any intentions to grow? A restaurant group, maybe. I might be of interest to some of my contacts in the hospitality investment industry. The obviousness of this shift from condescending to networking opportunity made me laugh. I answered, thank you, but I'm getting along really well with my existing counselors. Heather gave him a frustrated glance before turning back to face me. So, even while I believed you were having difficulty, you were actually building all of this? Yes, I stated plainly. Her tone hardened as she added, and tonight, even though you knew it was your food, you allowed us to sit here and critique your wine selection, portion sizes, and food. I clarified that I wanted to see how you would handle me if you still believe that I was the family failure. She snapped, and now I realize that seems manipulative. However, I could see that her fury was rooted in humiliation, more deceptive than inquiring about how I was able to pay for this meal, implying that in order for me to be able to purchase a lunch at this table, I must be in debt or be seeing someone who is affluent. I retorted, Heather, you weren't worried about me. You were taking pleasure in your perceived superiority. As we conversed, the evening service was coming to an end and the restaurant had slowly begun to empty. Jose came over holding a bottle. Your special reserve cognac, Miss Darr, he replied, for your investors meeting, and Chef Miranda says the kitchen is ready whenever you are. I said, thank you, Jose. Please let Miranda know I'll be there in 10 minutes. I looked back to my astonished family as he departed. I got up from my chair and remarked, I have a business to run. Darra, I appreciate you coming this evening. My mother hurriedly said, wait, don't depart in this manner. We ought to rejoice in your accomplishment. Maybe this weekend we could all get together for brunch. Get up to speed. For the first time, when I looked at her, I saw a woman attempting to preserve her pride and status rather than the scary character I had known as a child. I'll give it some thought, I said. However, I currently have a kitchen to manage and investors waiting. Ethan got up as I turned to go. His voice was softer than the rest when he said, Darra, this is amazing for what it is worth. It's impressive what you've constructed here. I apologize for not standing by you sooner. It has felt the most sincere. Of all the responses, I acknowledged him with a slight nod before leaving the table where I had just permanently altered my family's relationships. I had just taken 10 feet when I heard heels clicking behind me. I turned to see my mother rushing to catch up, her controlled exterior starting to falter. She lowered her voice and pleaded, Darr, please, you cannot simply abandon this realization and turn your back on it. We should discuss this. I turned to look at the private dining room where my real investors were waiting, a group of people talking about how to finance my second restaurant idea. I'm attending a meeting, Mom. Delay it, she demanded. This is a family, I answered steadily. You haven't prioritized your family in 5 years. Because you have finally determined that my career is worthy of your attention, my business obligations do not suddenly become optional. She had been followed by the rest of the family, forming an awkward group close to the bar area. My father appeared noticeably uneasy and accustomed to losing control of a circumstance. Heather's face vacillated between anger and what could have been admiration. In his businesslike, problem-solving tone, my father proposed, perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow. We're having dinner. Bradley eagerly continued, we have a lot to talk about, including how we might help you expand. I forcefully interrupted, my firm specializes in, I don't need your help. This site wasn't created with your acceptance in mind. I created it as this is what I enjoy doing and what I'm skilled at. My passion is still just as valid now as it was 5 years ago, even if it is successful. Nobody is stating that. My mother took a step back, darling. We merely take pride in your accomplishments. Are you relieved that my decisions no longer cause you social embarrassment, Mother, or are you proud? I knew I had touched close to heart because of her flinch. It's unfair, my father said. What's best for you has always been our goal. No, I told him. You want for me what fit your vision. There is a distinction. Miranda showed up beside me. Her presence is a helpful encouragement. She remarked softly, the Horde group is asking if you'll be joining them soon. I promised her 5 minutes. I turned back to my family as Miranda nodded and moved away. I have to leave. Heather spoke up, although her voice was not as sharp as usual. I must apologize to you. The things that I uttered tonight were cruel. I said, they were honest. The bright side of this evening is that I saw firsthand how you guys perceive me when you believe I'm having difficulties. Ethan added, that's not fair to the discussion. Individuals base their decisions on the facts at their disposal. We were unaware. I explained that you were unaware of my accomplishment. However, you were unaware that I was pursuing my passion. That ought to have been sufficient for my family to demonstrate fundamental decency. The gathering was enveloped in a thick hush. You're correct. To my surprise, my father eventually said, regardless of how it turned out, we ought to have encouraged your passion. This was an important admission coming from him. Richard Mitchell found it difficult to admit his errors. From here, where do we go? With sincere uncertainty in her tone, my mother inquired. One more oddity. I inhaled deeply as I thought about the query. These people were my family in spite of everything. They had truly hurt people. However, so was our common past. I had never intended to be completely estranged, just enough separation to allow me to create my own life without their opinion influencing my choices. I honestly replied, I don't know yet. However, one thing has been evident tonight. Going forward, our relationship must be on different terms if we are to have any. The family failure looking for atonement is not me. As a successful chef and business owner, I should be treated with the same deference as any other expert. My father promptly agreed, of course. I added, glaring at Bradley, who had the grace to look embarrassed, and that means no more comments about my life choices, no more unsolicited career advice, and absolutely no attempts to network through my restaurant. With hesitation, my mother started talking about Heather's wedding. What about it? I inquired. With a softer tone, Heather stated, we'd still like you to be there, as my sister, not as we previously believed you to be tonight. I tried to look past the years of criticism and rivalry as I stared at her. Nevertheless, there had also been enjoyable moments. Children's secrets, helping one another through our early heartbreaks, and intimate jokes that no one else could understand. I'll be present. I said I would, and if you'd like, I could host a dinner for the wedding party here at Mason, I said after giving it some thought. As my gift, said Heather, her eyes enlarging. You would do that? I said plainly, you're still my sister, after the way we've treated you. But just to be clear, I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm presenting something of which I'm proud on my own terms. I get it, she murmured softly, and I would be respected. A sincere grin. We spent the first part of the evening together. I pointed to the private dining room and remarked, now I really do need to go. My father nodded and said, of course, your business comes first. Not always, I told him, but tonight, yes, I said as they went to get their belongings. I'm free for brunch on Sunday, but not at your club. I believe you should visit a little spot in the East Village. My mother assured me that we would be present. I observed with relief as they filed out of the restaurant, their viewpoints forever altered by this tiny opening. I exhaled deeply as the door shut behind them, and I noticed that I felt strangely lighter. Miranda came over once again. Everything okay getting there? I answered. Families are complex. Tell me about it. She chuckled. As if I were a teenage waitress at Denny's, my mother still presents me as her daughter who works in a restaurant. I grinned, appreciating her comprehension. Let's discuss the spring cuisine. I'm excited about a few new ideas I have. As we made our way to the kitchen, my haven, my accomplishment, and my actual home, I came to the realization that showing my family what I had created wasn't the most significant discovery of the evening. It was my own complete recognition of it. Regardless of their acceptance, I had built this achievement on my own terms, and that understanding was more valuable than any affirmation they could ever provide. 2 weeks went by in a flash. I was pleasantly occupied with spring menu planning, meetings with my publisher regarding the cookbook layout, and initial conversations regarding a possible second site. However, memories of that family meal persisted, coming up in quiet times and requiring contemplation. The brunch on Sunday had gone surprisingly well. I had brought my family to Alma's, a hidden treasure owned by a former co-worker from my early days on the queue. At first, my parents were obviously uncomfortable with the mismatched chairs and the walls covered in graffiti, but they were won over by the simple yet delicious meal. I had no idea that plain eggs could have such a flavor. My dad acknowledged using homemade bread to wipe up the remaining shakshuka. Little changes, an opening rather than a total metamorphosis. After closing time, I sat at my usual table and saw the employees finishing their last tasks. Jessica was humming gently as she counted the register. Jose and Marcus were talking about wine pairings for the private event that is scheduled for tomorrow. After we had completed the spring menu changes, Miranda had departed an hour ago. Heather texted me, and my phone chimed. The agony of wedding planning. Just now, the florist doubled their quote. Is there any chance you could have coffee tomorrow? Could someone who won't just tell me what I want to hear give you some honest advice? This unexpected request for my viewpoint made me smile a little. One more tiny step. I responded with an SMS to confirm the time and location. My family and I were developing a relationship that I never could have imagined. Not the unwavering embrace I might have yearned for in the past, but something that might be worth more. A measured regard for adults with varying paths and values. In the last 2 weeks, my mother had called 3 times, her customary formality giving way to sincere inquiries about my job. An article on female cooks shattering stereotypes in the field was forwarded by my father, a tacit admission that he was attempting to comprehend my reality. Even Ethan had been in touch to ask if he may visit the kitchen with his kids. At some point, he had stated, I want them to know they have options. Everyone's definition of success is different. These were not the spectacular reconciliation of a Hollywood film, but rather shaky beginnings. I discovered that true healing takes place in silent times, tiny gestures, and the slow rewriting of ingrained habits. The biggest shift, however, was not in how my family saw me, but rather in the fact that I had finally stopped gauging my value by them. Strangely, I no longer felt the need for the approval I had once so urgently wanted from them. I had proven myself to me, not to them. This insight had also affected other aspects of my life. I had started a mentorship program to provide young chefs from underprivileged backgrounds with the support and opportunity they had so desperately sought. The Maison Kitchen became a classroom for 8 budding culinary artists every Saturday morning. They reminded me of my younger self, passionate, driven, and in need of just someone who saw their potential. I had promised Zoe, one of them, an apprenticeship because she had demonstrated such promise. It was a different kind of gratification than any professional recognition I had ever experienced. To see her confidence soar with each new ability she learnt, cook. I was jolted out of my reverie by Jessica's words. We are prepared to close. Before we leave, is there anything else you need? No, I'm grateful. I grinned. You all did a fantastic job tonight. I stayed at my table with my notebook open to a blank page while the employees left, wishing each other a good night. I had been searching for terms that would adequately describe my journey as I tried to write the introduction of my cookbook. I eventually started writing in the stillness of the deserted cafe. For me, food has always been the most authentic language. I use flavors as a substitute for words when necessary. I use my palate to guide me when paths appeared obscure. This book contains more than just recipes. They are parts of a life that is lived in search of genuineness as opposed to acceptance. I was torn between passion and expectation 5 years ago. Although it initially cost me a lot, going with the latter resulted in the most extravagant feast I could have ever dreamed of, not just in achieving professional success, but also in realizing that true riches is determined by having the guts to listen to your own voice, even when it is muffled against the cries of doubt, rather than by material success or approval from others. With the words now flowing easily, I put down my pen. New difficulties, including a challenging vendor negotiation, Heather's wedding preparation ordeal, and finishing the cookbook introduction, would arise tomorrow. But I felt a deep sense of calm today during this time of introspection. It had not been an easy road. On rare occasions, I had dozed off in the kitchen corners due to extreme tiredness. My hands still have scars from burns and slashes. There were times when my doubts were so strong that I had doubted everything. However, I had persisted. I couldn't picture living any other way, not because I felt the need to prove myself to others. I had discovered something more significant than achievement or family acceptance when I chose sincerity above approval. I had discovered who I was. Have you ever been forced to decide between doing what other people want you to do and doing what you truly want to do? Please share your stories in the comments section below. If this video spoke to you, remember to like it, Tell someone who might need a reminder that the most significant approval comes from within, and subscribe for more real tales of tenacity and success. I appreciate you coming along on this trip with me. Additionally, keep in mind that the most significant achievement is determined by your own sense of fulfillment and purpose rather than by the standards of others.